In what was seen as the ultimate test of his presidency, Joe Biden has just taken unscripted questions from reporters without a teleprompter for almost an hour. His voice was hoarse after a big week of long meetings in Washington, D.C. Well, President Joe Biden tried to talk up the NATO summit's successes. Then he called Kamala Harris Vice President Trump.
What concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one, the fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again.
And that wasn't even the biggest blunder today. He was slow in his responses, often rambling, sometimes plain awkward. Watching it as well was our Washington correspondent Annalise Nielsen. She joins us live now from DC. So, Annalise, first up, did he pass the test?
Look, I think it's just more of the same. I don't think that that's going to quell any fears. I don't think that's going to put any fears to bed. And I don't think it's going to be enough to just tip him out tomorrow, because he's still defiant. He's still staying in, and he's clearly got a very close-knit circle that's keeping control of the information he's getting, and he doesn't realize how bad this is. At that last moment when he was saying that if he was shown data that showed he would do worse than Kamala, he'd reconsider, but that's not close to the case. He's not seeing the polling. And when he tries to undermine the polling, there's huge trends, much more than any kind of margin of error. And I mean, go out and talk to people. I do hear this is on everyone's mind. But let's go through some of the big moments that people are going to be talking about from that press conference. I think the first would be when he was asked about this report that he told donors that he needed to start having shorter days so he wasn't so tired like he was on the debate day. One of those stories was that he said he was going to start going to bed at 8 p.m. He said that's not true.
Instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you looked at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time. At the very end, I'm catching hell from my wife.
Now, he was coming into this press conference from behind, not just because of his disastrous debate performance, but in the event just before where he was appearing with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky. He accidentally mixed up the names and referred to Vladimir Putin as the president of Ukraine. Now, he was asked about this in the press conference, and so we're going to wipe here between what was said at the event before and how he explained it away afterwards.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway.
Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing in my leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, here, I mean, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, it's Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is, well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time.
And we heard that from Biden quite a few times. When he was explaining things, he would kind of lose his train of thought and say, well, anyway, and then loop back around to something else. He was also asked multiple times about Kamala Harris, whether he thought she was fit to serve, why not let her serve. And he spoke about her only in positive terms.
The way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate, she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president.
This was one moment where he was asked a two-part question, the second being about his memory that he forgot.
Second question related to
bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or on some matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself, and that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's gotten more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs just last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None.
And while he was talking about foreign policy, Australia got a mention a few times, even twice in a row.
A group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia.
Yeah, there you go. There's some of the highlights, or perhaps the lowlights, during that almost an hour that he was talking today, Annalise. And, you know, to be fair, it has been a long week for him, long hours, lots of meetings, as I mentioned earlier. But the problem is he kept talking about the success of the NATO summit. But the problem for him is, and don't you agree, no one's talking about the summit. They're only talking about him, his health, and how long he can stay in the race for.
Look, that's absolutely right. And I think from an American perspective, they probably want to hear from him more on domestic issues. And then this ended up being a very foreign-focused press conference. And that's not going to be something that's going to get him over the line for another 4 years. What this is going to do is buy some time, but this is going to have to come to some kind of conclusion. And I know I said to you earlier today, I've heard more than one person in DC say that this is terminal. It has to end at some point. And the fear for Democrats is going to be, if they don't make some kind of move to at least just take him off the ticket and take the equation from being another 4 years to until January 20, there could be growing calls to enact the 25th Amendment to declare him incapable of continuing. And that is where it's going to hit crisis point. So this is real. This is going to be an issue where they're going to have to realise reality at some point. They've already had reports of donors drying up, and the reports are coming out that in the White House, in the Biden campaign, they're saying, well, we can do it without big donors. No, you can't. This is America. These elections are so expensive. That's completely divorced from reality. Yeah,
and also Hollywood moving against him as well. I mean, you know, of all the key voices, and you know, he talks about the Irish in him. You know, that's he's a proud man. He's a fighter. He'll dig in. But if there is any one person who's got to tap him on the shoulder here to go out gracefully, who do you think it would be? Would it be Jill? Would it be Barack? Would it be Hunter? You know, what's obviously that's his inner circle, but who would it be that would have the loudest voice?
Well, okay, when you talk about these people, when you talk about Jill Biden, I don't know how she's watching this and not doing something. I don't know how insular their circle is that they haven't done something. When you talk about Hunter, I know James Morrow made that joke earlier about how he needs a pardon. That's kind of serious. That's a real thing. And when we're talking about the 25th Amendment, if his dad's rendered incapable, he can't start handing out pardons. So that's going to be an equation of the inner circle. I think it has to be someone like Nancy Pelosi, honestly, coming in. Obviously, there's already some antagonism with Barack Obama because the report came out today that George Clooney ran his op-ed past Barack in the New York Times. And he obviously didn't say no. And this is where it's going to come back to, because he's not going anywhere. He's just as defiant as ever that he's going to win this.
Just an observation. You know how these things work when it comes to the press conferences, or rather the few of them that Joe Biden's actually done. I noticed that our colleague Peter Doocy from Fox News, he didn't get a question today. Excuse me. How does the White House go about choosing? I mean, it's such a big occasion today. How would it go about selecting a journalist? Would it obviously be more favourable for him?
Yeah, look, they obviously, when the Biden press secretary started, Jen Psaki, they reset from, it was a very different approach under the Trump administration. Everyone knows that. He had a press secretary that never held a press conference because he was always in front of the cameras. So they reset, and so it's usually AP gets the first question every day in the briefing room. And you could see that they went through wires services like AFP that asked a very forthright question. There was no doubt about that. CBS was the first, I think, only TV to get a question in there. And that's to keep them in line. He wasn't going to go to Peter Doocy because he holds his feet to the fire. And Peter Doocy's asked him a few questions on the campaign trail that have become iconic in the history of the Biden presidency, including were you ever involved, was Hunter ever involved, were you ever involved with Hunter's business dealings? And he said, no, that's come back to haunt him like nothing else. So he's obviously just avoiding that. And to even have some foreign journalists getting questions in there too, I was a bit surprised when the stakes are this high that they kind of let that emphasis take a hold. But I guess it kind of worked for them to give them a bit of a breather.
So when's the next big test? Is it this NBC interview that's at this moment scheduled for Sunday US time, I think it is?
I think it's Monday, but I could be wrong. So I guess that's the next one, but I don't know what more we need to see. That's not what we already know. So I don't know. He's got a ton of campaign events around the country, and we're just in this holding point. And then when he says the campaign hasn't really started in earnest because they don't usually until the election, we normally have a new candidate. So that logic does not fly. We all know Joe Biden. We all know Donald Trump. I don't see what's going to happen that moved the polls so dramatically in the lead up to election day. The only thing we're going to be looking at is turnout, because I just can't see young people getting excited to get out for that candidate, and that's more their base than the Republicans.
And unlikely to be riding with Biden, that's for sure. All right, Annalise, well done. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon.